When I pulled into the Baxter's parking lot, the first thing I noticed was how run down everything looked. I knew the place well, having grown up just a few blocks away, but I hadn't been back to the old neighborhood in 40 years, and a lot had changed in that long time. Somewhere around the end of World War II, the building I was now heading towards had been transformed from a family home with children and most likely a dog into a cozy neighborhood bar. At the time, it was a nice place where neighbors would come in for a beer after work, and wives would meet their husbands for a nice evening together. Now those good old days are long gone. Today, Baxter was in the poorest part of the most depressed suburb of Cleveland. There were more boarded-up buildings around him than residential ones, and most of them were covered in ugly graffiti from neighborhood gangs, cars abandoned near littered sidewalks where people were huddled in some of these coffins on wheels, littered all the nearby streets and alleys with their iron skeletons. This was a part of the city that the city fathers had long forgotten. I just pulled my cap further down on my forehead and went inside. The atmosphere of the old smoky bar hit all my senses at once. The smell was the first to attack. The disgustingly pungent smell of beer and urine. Yeah, not the most attractive way to present the establishment to visitors. The second blow hit my eyes. The entire room was very dark, with the exception of one corner, which was illuminated by a bright beam of a mini spotlight directed from somewhere above. A naked but very unattractive woman slowly wriggled in a circle of light, performing some kind of dance on a table next to the bar. She dropped her head and swayed back and forth to the music coming from the old jukebox next to the table. One of the old hits blaring from the speakers made my skin vibrate with every bass note Dusty hit. I knew that the volume would definitely make me deaf if I stayed here for long, but I only planned to do what I had to do and leave quickly. Once my eyes adjusted to the contrast between the light and the lack thereof, I walked over to the bar, found a chair that didn't have a torn or sticky seat, and settled down on it. The barmaid at the other end of the bar was using a rag to clean up the mess left by the swaying man, who seemed to be having a hard time keeping himself from testing the strength of the old polished wood in front of him with his forehead. When she was done, she turned around, tossed the rag into the sink, and washed her hands under the running tap. I just sat and waited in my place for her to pay attention to me. I haven't seen her for 40 years. She has changed terribly over such a long period of time, but I would still recognize her anywhere. Unnoticed over the years, I followed her and the events that took place in her life, and a couple of times I saw her very close, although she did not even notice me. I didn't know if she would still be able to recognize me, but I hoped not. At that moment, she had her back to me. Her jeans, tucked into cowboy boots, hugged her hips much more than I remembered, and the ugly layer of belly fat bulged outward and hung over the cinched belt at her waist. She was wearing a faded white t-shirt with the words Baxter's in faded letters on the back. The silver-gray locks that made up her hairstyle fell to the middle of her back, pulled back into a messy ponytail. It seemed that she had not used a brush or comb for a long time. From my bar stool, I could see the collection of tattoos on her arms and neck, and knew that there were others, hidden from view in different places. From the outside, her face looked tired and gloomy. Her nose was twisted to one side, and a jagged scar stretching over one eye told of her past hard life. She didn't wear makeup, as if that could somehow help her appearance, and she seemed to have a perpetual, crooked smile on her lips. Overall, this bartender looked like a hardened vixen whom I would not want to meet face-to-face in a dark alley. Her name was Sue Ann. After wiping her hands, she took a sip of alcohol from the glass that stood by the sink. Shaking her hair to give it some semblance of order, she turned and looked around her domain. That's when she noticed a new client, me. As she approached, the deafening music from the machine finally stopped, and the dancer stepped down from the table. "I'll be back in an hour," said the stripper, worn out by life, not even trying to cover her dangling, saggy breasts as she walked past us. "Okay," came the laconic reaction from the other side of the counter. The barmaid stopped in front of me and asked, "What can I offer you?" "Bud Light," I said, placing a $5 bill on the counter. She went to the refrigerator and took my beer out of it. Opening it with a practiced click and placing the bottle in front of me, she took the money and paused to give me another careful look before returning to the sink to wash the dirty glasses that had accumulated. I couldn't tell if she recognized me. Probably not. After all, a lot of time has passed, and no matter how much she has changed, I myself have changed no less. Heck, back then I had a head of wavy blonde hair, but now I have more smooth skin than hair on my scalp, which is why I always wear a baseball cap. The man at the other end of the bar finally achieved his goal, and his head successfully met with a battered tree, after which his dazed body collapsed on the spit-stained floor. "Oh shit!" An irritated exclamation immediately came from the sink. "Elroy, why do you always do this to me?" She stood, wiping her hands again, and looked around the room with disgust. "Can someone help me get this drunk into his car?" "What about you?" she asked, waving a rag in my direction. "Okay," I answered evenly, putting my beer on the counter. "The two of yous had to lift, pull, drag, and then push, bend and push this extremely drunk guy from the floor, on which he collapsed like a sack, to a more or less sitting position behind the wheel of his car." As we were heading back to the bar, behind us, the drinker's car suddenly came to life, howled, and sped down the street. However, we never heard the expected roar of the accident, so we simply shrugged our shoulders and continued on our way back. "Thank you," the barmaid said, placing another beer in front of me. "This clown puts on the same show about once a week. One day he'll stop coming here when he crashes into something and splits his drunk ass apart." For the second time since I entered, she looked at me intently from head to toe. I couldn't read her mind, but I was curious if she recognized me. "What's the matter?" I asked. "Nothing like that," she drawled. "You just look familiar, that's all." "Are you from around here?" "I'm from Texas. I was passing through here, just passing by, and decided to take a look." Glancing at me with the same incredulous gaze, she returned to the sink, took the left glass, and took another sip. Now that I could see better in the darkness, I looked around the room again and saw that I was the only customer left in the bar. As I looked around, I heard a glass being set down clink, and she muttered, "Crap." Her head snapped in my direction, and she stared at me with a mixture of amazement and hatred. "Ray," she hissed in disbelief, coming up and standing in front of me, placing her fists on her thick thighs. Burst my eyes. "But how is this possible? You're dead. I shot you 40 years ago." "Oops, here comes the black cat, suddenly jumping out of the bag. "Well, actually, Sue Ann, you didn't kill me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here now." I took a sip from my bottle and placed it on the counter. "Yes. Everyone thought that you did it, but it wasn't so. That's why you've been locked up in Marysville for the last 38 years. For doing something you're talking about you just thought you did. I hope you had a pleasant time there." I smiled at the corner of my lips. "Fuck you, son of a bitch," she growled, piercing me with her gaze. "Perhaps, for a change, you could try using some of the colorful expressions that other prisoners with whom you shared cells taught you. Come on, darling, let me see the real you, the hard and straight as a steel nail little bitch you've turned into." In tense silence, I calmly took another sip of my Bud Light and, turning the bottle slightly in my hand, pointed the neck in the direction of the dumbfounded Sue Ann. "What do you have there?" "I think I see the property of Big Wanda tattoo on your neck. Come on, she probably taught you a lot more than being a son of a bitch. I know about all those nights you spent with her. You must have enjoyed every minute of it. I also know all about the times she sold you to other gangs for cigarettes. Well, damn it, I can see their tattoos all over your arms. They passed you from cell to cell so that everyone could use your services. It must have been a funny sight, huh, Sue Ann?" Shock, pain, and hatred blazed in her glassy pupils, boring into me. "I even know about the child you gave birth to from that hefty guard." What was his name? Malcolm, I think. But it doesn't matter. The child still had to be sent to the state service for family affairs. "So, as you can see, I know everything about you, from the day you shot me in the head." She stood there on the other side of the bar, staring at me with wide eyes, frozen in place like a marble statue. I just smiled slightly at her, put my elbows on the counter and, resting my chin on my clasped fingers, appraisingly watched her reaction. We stood and sat opposite each other for a long time, looking into each other's eyes, while neither of us moved or looked away. She was the first to blink as she turned and took a few hesitant steps to pour herself another drink, a larger one this time. I took the opportunity and also slowly took a sip of my bottle. Sue Ann stood at the sink, both hands on either side of the countertop, and turning her head slightly, she looked askance at my reflection in the mirror hanging in front of her. She didn't say a word, but I could almost hear the thoughts rustling through her mind. She took another long sip from her glass, exhaled, and turned to me. "So why the hell are you here?" I smiled and took another sip, too. "I just wanted to know how you were doing. Maybe we could remember the old days? You know, reminiscing about the past?" Her face changed as she looked down at the floor. The stern expression on her face softened, her shoulders hunched, and she somehow shrank, and her rat tail slid down, covering one breast. When she raised her head again, I could have sworn she looked sad and exhausted. I didn't believe it for a second. In front of me was still the woman who cheated on me with that lawyer. The same woman who exchanged me, like some old, no longer needed a car, for a new, richer, and more respectable husband. The same woman who shot me in the head in cold blood and set my trailer on fire, burning my body beyond recognition. Finally, this was the woman who smashed her new husband's brains all over the living room carpet when she got tired of him. No, I wouldn't buy a word that came out of her faded lips. She spoke softly and tiredly as she asked, "What do you want from me, Ray? I served my time and paid off my debt in full. I'll be on parole for the rest of my life, so you don't have to worry about that. Our son? I haven't seen Robbie in all these damn 40 years. I don't even know where he is now. Your mother and father made it very clear to me that they wanted nothing to do with me, and Robbie would never know what I did. Hell, he's probably already forgotten I exist. I'll never see him again. So either say what you need or get the hell out of here." Another long sip from the bottle, and another smile from me. "I just wanted you to know that your vile betrayal, the fact that you kicked me out and finally put a bullet in my head, was the best whatever happened to me. Amazing, right? Seriously, this is the best thing I've ever seen in my entire life." You ask why? It's quite simple. If you hadn't done what you did, I wouldn't have gotten rich, now having more money than I can ever spend. I wouldn't have a beautiful, loving wife who worships the ground I walk on, and I, too, love her more than anything. If it weren't for you, she and I wouldn't have had 5 children of our own, and we wouldn't have taken in 12 more adopted ones, and I wouldn't have 19 grandchildren now. Sue Ann's pale skin began to turn red, and a thin vein on her temple began to swell and pulsate as I quietly told her about myself and the life she had missed. I wouldn't be a member of the Kiwanis. I wouldn't be a member of the Chamber of Commerce. I wouldn't be a member of the country club or the city council. I would not create from scratch and sell 2 companies, the combined income from which would provide my children and my children's children with a comfortable life. I wouldn't have traveled the whole world and seen the 7 famous wonders of the world. Without what you did, I wouldn't be making love to my wife on top of a mountain in Peru, under the most incredible starry sky we've ever seen. I wouldn't do it nothing from this. Thanks to you, I got everything a man could dream of. That's why I just wanted to come by and thank you for all." I watched as she stood there with her head slightly bowed and her eyes closed, apparently wistfully thinking about what she had and what could have been. She served a sentence of 38 endless years for crimes she did not commit. I had 40 years of a wonderful, love-filled life. She crawled at the bottom, among the most incredible dirt, and committed the most disgusting, perverted acts, just to survive. I flourished and grew under the sunshine and clear skies. She was now in her early 60s, killing her days in a seedy, smelly bar and living in a room upstairs. I lived in a beautiful mansion and attended a country club. Life was so unfair. When I thought about this, I couldn't help but laugh. "Thanks for rubbing my nose in this, Ray," she said in an almost lifeless voice. "I spent every minute of every day regretting my decisions, and I had a lot of time to think about it. Now I'm too old and worn out to do anything other than live my shitty life day by day. Maybe, if I'm lucky, I'll die quietly in my bed. But I don't think so, because everything in my life was going wrong, one after another. I fell into a cesspool and will probably die in it. There's nothing you can tell me that could make this worse. Hell is hell, Ray. So, thanks for stopping by. Now get out of here." She turned back to the sink and downed the rest of what was in her glass. "Well, thank you for the beer, too," I said, putting the empty bottle on the counter. "You can keep the change." I turned and headed towards the door. "I have a question before you go." Her hoarse voice rang out behind me. "Why did you stay alive? Who did I shoot at?" I stopped in the darkness and turned to look at her one last time. This time I didn't have a smile, but I answered anyway. It was my friend, Mac. He was the person I would sometimes allow to stay overnight in my trailer. Mac was sick with pneumonia and passed away the morning you came and did what you planned to do to me. Obviously, you assumed that since Mac slept in my bed and was about my height and weight, that it was me. As I found out later, he was already dead by the time you arrived. I returned just as you jumped into your car and sped away. I hid in the bushes when the firefighters and police arrived, and they thought I was in the trailer that burned to the ground. That night, the Ray you knew disappeared, and I became Mac. From now on, Ray was dead. Mac had a full life ahead of him. However, I had one last thing to do as Ray. The night you shot your lawyer husband, I was there. You would never know it, but I was there. I waited until you passed out from an evening of drinking, and when Mr. Shit came home, I put a bullet in his forehead, just like you shot Mac in cold blood, thinking it was me. After that, I put the gun in your hand and took the contents of his secret safe. You took responsibility for his murder and mine. The money I took from the asshole lawyer gave me the startup capital I needed to start a new life under a different name. Your life went to hell, and I left for Texas. So, Sue Ann, everything I did was because of how you treated me. Because I loved you, and you trampled on my love and tried to take my life. You know what the Bible says? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You pissed me the hell off, and I made sure your life was a living hell. The deed was done, and the rat-gnawed back cover of the old book was slammed shut. As I walked out the door of the bar, I turned the tattered sign in the window from open to closed.